Love helping your clients but hate sales and marketing, but somehow you ended up with sales and marketing responsibilities? Then this is the podcast for you. Hi, Chief Nerd Reuben Swartz here, and I spent a long time learning these lessons the hard way, and I want to help you learn them the easy way by sharing my experiences and talking with brilliant people who have figured out how to hack not just the code, but the sales and marketing process as well. Of course, as a nerdy person who hated struggling with complex CRMs, I had to create my own CRM for people who actually hate selling, which sounds like an oxymoron, but if it sounds interesting to you, check it out at Mimiran.com. That's Mimiran.com. And whether or not you need a new CRM, you'll find proposal templates and sample lead magnets to help you grow your business. Now let's get to it. Hi, welcome to Sales for Nerds. Chief Nerd Reuben Swartz here, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I've actually got a bunch of episodes queued up, some great episodes with some great guests, and since I'm releasing this kind of in the middle of the holiday season between Christmas and New Year's, I kind of figure not a whole lot of people are probably going to be listening right now or paying attention, and so I didn't want to stick a guest in there. And also, since it's not just the end of the year, it's also kind of the end of the decade, or some people might say we have another year, but I'm considering it the end of the decade because the 20s are about to start. So I've been trying to think a little bit about what I've learned over the past decade. I was having this conversation with some folks, and someone said, oh, you should just do a podcast episode on this. So here we are. We're going to talk about some things that I have learned over the past decade. Hopefully they're already obvious to you. A lot of them sound really obvious to me when I state them now, and I'm like, gosh, why didn't I know that? But that's kind of what life is about. Now, in the spirit of Sales for Nerds, I do have a little bit of wine in my glass. I have some Chateau Bellevue Bordeaux, mostly Merlot, some Cabernet Sauvignon, some Cab Franc. Thanks a lot to the affordable wine selection at Costco. So that's quite nice. And, you know, as if I'm not pretentious enough to talk about the things I've learned over the past decade, let me tell you about the Bordeaux in my glass first. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. So one of the first things that I like to think that I knew earlier, but I really actually kind of formalized it in my thinking over the past decade is being angry or mean to others or to yourself rarely makes things better. And there are a lot of reasons that we might be angry or upset with somebody, and sometimes we're really justified in it, but being angry or mean and taking it out on them usually just makes things worse. And I think that's something that we intuitively understand, although sometimes it's harder to live by that than it is to just understand it. But the other thing that was really important to me over the past decade was realizing that that applies to how I treat myself as well. I can be disappointed in myself. I can expect myself to do something differently or better. I don't have to be mean to myself. I don't have to be angry at myself in a way that I wouldn't be to somebody else. And that's not letting myself off easy. That's giving me the same growth and room to grow that I would want to give to anybody else. Now, the flip side of this is anger and other emotions are telling us something. They're not there for no reason. We've evolved them to help us stay alive. And we don't want just to shut those emotions out. We want to listen to them and understand what they're telling us. So sometimes they might be giving us some subtle information that a person really isn't doing exactly what they say they are, might be out to do something that we don't like, or perhaps there's somebody who's really making us feel good, and we want to recognize that. And a lot of times, it's our own emotions telling us something about ourselves. We're upset with somebody who cut us off in traffic because we're in a hurry. We're upset with how someone else is talking in a meeting because we had different expectations for the meeting, and we're frustrated we're not getting what we want, and we're really angry about that. Now, taking that to yet another corollary is when other people are angry or mean to you, it often has nothing to do with what you're doing. Sometimes people are upset for their own reasons, and you happen to be there to receive the brunt of it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't screw up or do something wrong. Sometimes you did. But if you see that really disproportionate response to something, you might say, hey, is there something else going on that I should know about that I can help you with? Now, going along with this, I think it's easy to get wrapped up in negative thoughts, but it's important as much as we can to let the best people in our life occupy the most space in our mind. Don't let the worst people take up space there or dictate what you do any more than necessary. And my son's really into video games, so I would tell him sometimes, you wouldn't give your Xbox controller to that person you're really mad at and let that person make your character do self-destructive things, right? That would make no sense. Just because you're fighting with someone in a video game, you wouldn't turn the controller over to your opponent. So don't do that mentally. If you're having an issue with somebody, try to work it out, try to get away from that person, but don't let that person sit there and take over your mind. Now, of course, that's really easy to say because another thing I've learned is we like to pretend that we're rational creatures. And we do have some capacity for rationality. Sometimes it's really impressive. But for the most part, we're emotional creatures, just like every other creature, every other animal. And we often are very good at using rationality to fill in a backstory for what we've already decided. And this is, of course, an important part of sales and marketing. It's also just an important part of life and human interaction and how we think about ourselves. And for a long time, I've realized, I think it's fairly obvious, that we are not in our natural habitat as human beings. But over the past decade, I've realized something further, which is we are actually zoo animals. And if you go visit the zoo and you're all excited when you're a kid, you went to go see the lion or the polar bear or whatever, and you get there and there's this kind of depressed looking creature just sitting there napping or dozing or just being bored. And you're thinking, what's going on here? Well, that's kind of what we've done to ourselves in a way. Right? We are not just slightly out of our natural habitat in a slightly different natural habitat. We are in the zoo. We are not built to, for example, eat a ton of highly processed foods and sit on our butts all day. And that's what a lot of us do. Or if we're not sitting on our butts all day, we're doing really repetitive things that lead to pain and injuries that, again, are not really what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to eat a wide variety of natural foods. We're supposed to move around a bunch. We're supposed to get adequate sleep, right? We're not built for artificial light and endless Netflix queues. And we're also built for a lot of social interaction with people that we care about. We're not built for sitting around where everyone's texting on their own devices, even if they're gathered at the same table. We're not built for socializing through a social network. We're built for socializing with people in person. And I think a lot of what happens when you see people who are angry, upset, depressed, etc., not to say that they don't need to do some things about their life, perhaps, but we have taken ourselves as a species and plunked ourselves in the zoo. So it's not surprising that you see that we have a lot of the behavior of zoo creatures. And don't get me wrong, there's no way to go back to how it was before civilization, and nor would I want to. I like smartphones, I like podcasting, I like the Costco wine selection, et cetera, et cetera. But just be aware that a lot of times the zoo isn't built for the creatures in the zoo. It's built for the people running the zoo. And they may not have your best interests at heart. Try to make space within the zoo to live according to how humans are actually supposed to live. And to paraphrase the feminist statement, I subscribe to the radical notion that women are people too. I subscribe to the radical notion that people are people too. Old people, young people, male people, female people, trans people, conservative people, liberal people, people born in one country or another country with one religion or another religion. We're all people. And it's worthwhile to be suspicious of people who want you to think that some people are not actually truly people. They're putting down folks who are outside of their tribe, which unfortunately I think is a natural part of what we evolved to do, but it's very dangerous and it's not right. And it leads to a lot of, obviously a lot of fighting and negative stuff throughout the world. And if you can just keep in mind that all people are people, hopefully that you don't fall prey to some of that. Now, speaking of which, we are in a constant battle for our own attention. In other words, part of the challenge we have, especially when people might be manipulating us because they want to sell something to the zoo animals or they want to turn some of the zoo animals against others or whatever, we have some really powerful forces trying to take over our attention. You might even say some of the most powerful entities in human history, governmental and media, both traditional media and online media, and they have more information at their disposal than ever before. And I'm going to single out Facebook because I think it's perhaps the most pernicious and the most powerful of all these forces, but it's by no means the only one. It's just the one that has perhaps succeeded, if you will, the best. They know, based on data from billions of people, what is most likely to keep you on the site and keep you clicking on ads. And a lot of that is not just baby pictures. It's not just things that would quote unquote enrich your life. A lot of it is the negative emotions, the outrage-driven political posts or other things like that that cause a lot of engagement because it triggers stuff in our brain. Right? Remember, we're pretending to be rational, and it makes it very easy for folks who perhaps want to pretend that some people aren't people to get a bunch of folks behind them on social media. Now, even assuming that you're not falling down that kind of rabbit hole, you are still waging a battle for your attention. What you want to do, where you want to put your focus and your priorities is very different than what the zookeepers might want for your priorities, right? They want to sell you stuff, or they want to gain your political support for something, or they want to silence your voice from speaking out on important issues, et cetera, et cetera. And this has always been true, but it's never been at the scale and possibility and effectiveness that it's at now, where folks can use artificial intelligence to mine billions or trillions or whatever comes after that pieces of data to try to find just the right thing to commandeer your attention a little bit more. Now, following on from this, abstention is a vote for the status quo. And I don't just mean in elections. I mean in life and whatever it is you're doing. Sometimes we're overwhelmed. We do have too much information, not all of it very useful. And the easiest thing to do is just to not have an opinion about things. And it's interesting to think about, well, who might want us to not have an opinion, right? It's often the people selling us something who want us to keep just doing whatever it is we're doing without thinking too much about it. Of course, there's plenty of times where abstaining and not having an opinion is really useful. You don't have to have an opinion about everything. Something that I have been learning throughout my life as well. Now, here's perhaps the most shocking thing I've learned over the past decade. Salad can actually be really, really good. This seems to come out of left field. I know it doesn't necessarily follow along from the rest of it, but it actually does relate to, hey, what are we actually supposed to eat? And what's going to make me feel good throughout the day compared to what's easy and convenient and sort of the default option for me to eat? So I got in the habit of eating salads a couple of years ago, and now I'm one of those old people where I'm used to what I want to eat, and if I don't have my salad for a few days, I start getting cranky and agitated, which might be a whole other problem. But it can actually taste really good, and it has changed the way my afternoons work. And if you think this is impossible, if you're one of those people like I was, who was like, ooh, you're ordering a salad for lunch? What's wrong with you? It's actually quite a revelation. Now, speaking of things that are not super important, but you should know, don't take long-range two-point shots. Either go to the basket or step behind the arc for 3 points. The expected payoff for the long-range two-point shot is just the worst shot in the game. So to look at it, kind of, just take rule of thumb. If you're really good at basketball, you make about half your two-point shots and maybe 40% of your 3-point shots. So 40% of a 3-point shot is 1.2 points. 50% of a 2-point shot is 1 point. But if you're out there at 20 feet taking a 2-point shot and you're making, 18 feet, you're making say 35% of them, then your expected return on those shots is bad. So that's one of those areas where you can just look at the math and you kind of knew what was going to happen in the NBA. They were going to start shooting more and more 3-pointers. And if you're playing pickup basketball, you should do that too. And there may be a lot of other areas that aren't quite like that, but where you can apply those types of metrics and see that there are certain things that's just really not worth doing so that you can concentrate on the things that give you a much better return. Now, going back to slightly more serious topics again, people, especially your kids, are much more interested in what you do than what you say. And people, especially your kids, are very, very interested in the difference between what you do and what you say. So I think all of us have some difference between what we say and what we actually live up to. Heck, sometimes maybe we even do a better job every once in a while of doing something that we didn't say. But that discrepancy is important, and it's really important for me as a dad now to make sure that I'm doing the right stuff, because they really don't care that much about what I say, but they're watching very closely what I do. Now, taking this from the family into the office or into the work environment, I think that's equally true. And when we get into sales, even a decade ago, I was not happy about sales. I would just do it grudgingly. And so one of the biggest things I did that helped me tremendously, and really is kind of the heart of this whole Sales for Nerds effort, is I decided I wasn't going to sell anymore. Quote unquote sell. I was going to help. And if I did a good job selecting the people I was trying to help, or attracting the right people to help, some of those instances would involve people paying me money so I could do my thing. But just changing that word in my brain really changed the way I approached a lot of interactions that previously were terribly awkward and uncomfortable, and that made me very ineffective. Now it's like, oh, I just want to go help folks. Let's see what happens. And I know from talking to a lot of other people, they've gone through a similar experience where we've built up this myth of sales being some kind of competition where we're trying to convince somebody, we're trying to sell somebody else. And of course, there are salespeople who do that, and some of them make a very good living. But I think a lot of them don't, and a lot of them are very unhappy. If we're actually helping, not only are we going to make more money, most of us, but we're actually going to do the right things and do something meaningful. Now, stepping beyond this, how do we attract the right people? I went through a similar change where I decided I wasn't going to quote unquote market anymore. Now, of course, I have a lot of people who are upset with me because they say I need to do a better job marketing, which is true. But bear with me. Instead of marketing, focus on teaching. Whatever it is that you do, how do you teach people how to do that? Right? If you're a carpenter, you can teach people how to make a desk. If you're a basketball player, you can teach people where to shoot. Even if you're not a basketball player and you have a podcast, you can opine on where you should be shooting from. But whatever it is that's your thing, teach people all about it. And sometimes you might get nervous, well, I'm going to give away my secret sauce. And I think if your secret sauce is that easy to copy, people probably aren't going to pay you for it anyway. But that kind of lets your passion come through. It lets you talk about the thing that your prospects care about instead of yourself, right? Instead of, I'm so awesome. It's like, hey, let's make this desk. Here's how we do it. This leads to having good conversations. And something that I've learned over the past decade is that talking to the right people is fun, even for introverts like myself. And a few years back, I sort of flipped a switch on my phone in my preferences panel, if you will, where it used to be I would do anything to avoid picking up the phone. I decided I'm going to pick up the phone by default and just call people. And I thought, this is going to be a little scary, but let me just try it for a little bit. And it has been awesome and amazing. I've had so many more conversations with people, and conversations are really kind of the atomic unit of human socialization, right? It's not an email, it's not a text, it's not some social media interaction. It's a conversation. That's what we're built for. There's so much more information in a conversation than even if you transcribe the email and or transcribe a conversation and exchange it over email. It wouldn't have the same nuance. You don't have the tone of voice. You don't have the pauses. You don't have, especially if you're face to face, the eye contact and the expressions. So I would encourage the folks, especially if you feel like you're in that position where, gosh, I really hate picking up the phone. I don't want to call people. I'm an introvert. I get it. Been there, still there. But I actually love talking to people, and it's been really nice, not just for work, but just for life, because I think so many of us are running around. We're trying to do all the stuff that's urgent, and there's always too much of that. And then we want to be present for our family, maybe even like hang out with our friends, maybe even get a little exercise here and there. And it's very easy to let some of our meaningful relationships languish because there isn't something urgent going on with them. And tools like Facebook or whatever can be helpful for maintaining some level of those ties. But I kind of think of it as it's like the fast food equivalent of socialization. It's fast and cheap and convenient, but at the end of the day, it's not very nourishing and it's not truly a substitute for real interaction. So I look at how do we use technology to facilitate real conversations rather than to replace them. That's obviously a big part of the member in CRM, and I think it's a useful way to think about social media, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that and staying connected to people and liking baby photos or congratulating someone on a new job or whatever it is, but use that to facilitate real live conversational interaction. Now, you may be sick of hearing me say this if you're a longtime listener, but something that I learned over the past decade, which is very important, is that a proposal is a story, not a brochure. If you're sending out proposals and you think you've got a deal in the bag and people come back like, I don't really get it, I'm not sure, we might go with someone else, we might just not do anything, chances are you're not telling the story right. You're just saying, hey, we're awesome, you should totally hire us, which is not very compelling. So tell the story and remember that the hero of the story is the buyer, not the seller, and that any kind of great story needs a great villain. So sometimes if you're like, well, gosh, I don't really understand what's going on here, there's either something that they haven't told you yet, or there just isn't that big of a problem. And people are just kind of like, oh, I'd like to explore options for XYZ. But those are the kind of things that, oh, guess what? We decided we're going to punt that till next quarter or next year or whatever. But if there's a villain there, and it doesn't have to be Darth Vader, it could just be, we're losing a whole bunch of money or whatever it is, there's some compelling reason for them to act. That's when, they're actually going to do something about it. Now, that notion of the proposal being a story, not a brochure, and the hero of the story being a buyer, not the seller, and the compelling story needing a compelling villain, all of those points also apply to your website. So if your website is, we're so awesome, you should totally hire us, we're amazing, we've got the best stuff, we've got the best services, whatever it is, that's not going to be as effective as, hey, here's a bunch of resources for you to deal with this problem that you have, the reason that you came to our site, the reason that you might want to work with us. Here's how we've made other people heroes. And here's how you overcome this stuff that can really hold you back. Now, going back to our natural habitat and all that and our zoo life, there are 24 hours in a day. And sleep is really important. Cut back on other things before cutting back on sleep. This is something I had a lot of trouble with when I was younger. And sometimes you just have to stay up late. You've got a sick kid, you've got this crazy deadline that just has to be met at work or whatever it is. But a lot of times we don't really have to do that. And I found, especially as I've gotten older, that the worse I punish myself by not sleeping, the longer it takes me to recover these days. So by all means, make sure that you get good sleep. So I hope that's been helpful. I'd love to hear what you've learned over the past decade. Drop me a comment if there's anything in particular that you thought was particularly interesting or that you disagree with. Would love to hear about that too. And remember, be kind to yourself. These are rules that I know that I've tried to live by, but I don't necessarily do a perfect job with. And keep in mind that everyone, including you, is trying to do the best they can in the zoo. So I'm really excited for the next decade, wondering what I'm going to learn that's going to seem really obvious in 10 years that I have no idea about now. And with that, all the best for 2020 and beyond. Thanks for listening. If you have a friend who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. Have a friend who wouldn't benefit, but you haven't talked to in a while, give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and help me create the show that's most useful to you. And if you're frustrated with your sales and marketing process or lack thereof, check out Memoranda CRM for people who hate selling. Until next time.